Hello, everybody. One sec, I forgot to do this, but I hope that you had a good week and your weekend's going well so far. I figured it was about time that I covered what's been happening. The title is a reference to a movie. Let me see what year it was. This called "The Spy Who Came In from the Cold." Good movie. I enjoyed it quite a bit. It's a Cold War era spy film about the difficulties in fighting the Cold War and what needs to be done behind the scenes, and reconciling that with the morals and rights inherent in a democracy. I like it as the general, what would it be, metaphor or image though of you're out in the snow. It's just terrible. You've become used to this harsh environment, be it war, be it winter, be it whatever, and you're coming inside and it's warm and comfortable again, and just the difficulty in kind of adjusting to that. Because I think conflict and sadness and a lot of negative emotions can be very addictive. They can be things that you kind of get stuck in and you have trouble getting out. So I'm using that today because I feel like that's kind of what's happening, wherein Russia and America are trying to come in from the cold, but it's proving to be very difficult. And this is kind of a unique diplomatic situation we're facing, and I can't really recall one that's quite like this. So let's get into it. I don't have too many articles today. We're just going to go through and talk about various stuff. So the negotiations have started between the United States and Russia, kind of, sort of, maybe. We had the Riyadh meeting between Lavrov and Rubio, wherein Ukraine was not discussed, but there was an agreement on reopening the embassies. Or rather, restaffing the embassies. I don't think they were closed, but they were de facto closed because they were all the diplomatic staff were gone and there was no ambassador. So that's happened. They've appointed ambassadors and they've started to go forward. The U.S. voted with Russia at the UN over a resolution. I think what initially happened was the resolution was in kind of memory of the third year of the beginning of the SMO, and it was condemning Russia for invading Ukraine. And Russia and America voted on a resolution that called for an end to the conflict and recognizing the bloodshed, but didn't explicitly condemn Russia. And that pissed Europe off a lot. Take a sip. So that's happened. We have the fallout of the whole Zelensky Oval Office thing. And I haven't been covering this quite as much as I normally would. Because I just had other stuff that I've been doing. But B, it's just really like, we'll get into it. It's kind of a dead heat on a merry-go-round. It does remind me a lot of the Cold War in some ways, wherein both sides are just kind of maneuvering over peanuts, and it's very ambiguous, and both countries are kind of functioning as a black box at the moment. Is kind of how I'm feeling about this conflict at present. So America got Ukraine to come and negotiate with them at Jeddah, another city in Saudi Arabia. What was the other? So Zelensky was not allowed to partake. There was like the American negotiating team and the Ukrainian negotiating team. And they came up with the ceasefire proposal, which is basically Ukraine gets everything it wants. Let's just see here. So, this is like an ongoing thing that you notice continually throughout this. Is the U.S. and Europe and Ukraine will negotiate between each other without including the Russians, and then they like expect the Russians to just accept it. So they decided to, I don't know, they decided to go and have this negotiation about the terms of a ceasefire, and then they were just expecting Russia to accept it, I guess. There's like, if Ukraine and US agree, then it's somehow going to work out. And this is something we've seen continually throughout this conflict, where they've passed like peace treaties and stuff like that, without Russia even being like involved, explicitly barred from it. Okay, so let's take a. I'm just trying to find where the ceasefire terms are. The ceasefire terms are basically just Russia giving up, like the Zelensky plan. I'm just trying to find it. I'm just trying to find this proposal terms. Something I always hate about the media is they never like actually quote, or they very seldom actually quote what the thing is, like what they're talking about. Okay. So let's go through this. So America lifted the pause on intelligence sharing. We have the agreement, which hasn't actually been signed for some reason. Okay, where is the... I'm trying to find it, because I guess they're just not, like, it's not listed anywhere. But basically, it initially, the initial ceasefire plan, because I don't know, the news media is not posting it, was that they were going to ban... Okay, this was the original ceasefire plan. This is how much of a scam this is. Aerial combat... We're going to ban fighting in the air, the sea, long-range missiles, and attacks on energy infrastructure. That was what the initial ceasefire was going to be, but ground fighting could continue. And I'm just thinking, well, Ukraine doesn't have any of those. They have a couple water drones, I guess. I think they're out of ATACMS, or they only have like a handful of them remaining. They don't really have an air force. So how does that benefit Russia? It doesn't. It just basically neuters them and takes away all of their advantages while giving them nothing in return. Is kind of where we're at the moment with this ceasefire. Let's see here. I don't know. Once again, it doesn't look like they actually published any of this. It's just referring to it. Let's see here. Is there a source? Is there a source for this? No, of course there's no source for this. It's only CBC. Anyways, okay, so yeah, that's where we're at the moment with regards to that. So they changed the ceasefire into being a total ceasefire for 30 days, and they said, you know what, like, look, Putin, we're going to have the ceasefire for 30 days. Let me see if I can find the video. Let me see if I can find this. Okay. So he was there with Viktor Lukashenko the other day. So Putin was like, this deal gives us nothing. Here is the conditions that we will accept for a ceasefire. So let's take a look
Vladimir
at what they
Putin did 2 days to find out. Will he accept the US-Ukraine 30-day ceasefire plan?
We agree with the proposals to cease hostilities.
A positive-sounding answer at first, but there are conditions.
This cessation should lead to long-term peace and would eliminate the original causes of this crisis.
Those causes include the possibility of Ukraine joining NATO, which the US now says is off the table. But
Wait a minute, they're admitting that? I thought this whole thing was just a pure imperialist land grab. I thought that Russia was a one-man psycho state, and that was not part of it.
there is also Putin's false claim Ukraine is led by neo-Nazis. He knows there is little prospect of a change in government in Ukraine in the near future.
Putin's maximalist demands in Ukraine have not changed. He wants to destroy Ukraine as a country, and he does not want it to become part.
I mean, it's not actually maximalist demands. Maximalist demands would be claiming everything east of the Dnieper and the Black Sea coast. That is what maximalist demands would be. But these people like just use words, they don't know what they mean.
Part of NATO and the European Union.
And there is the
now, once again, to reiterate, the initial position of Russia was Ukraine could join the EU but couldn't join NATO. Now, they're not going to let them join the EU now after the last, 3 years, but...
timing of this peace proposal. Putin's troops are retaking much of the Russian land occupied by Ukraine since last year. An advantage visited the region
when the ceasefire is broken.
An advantage he will want to press home. Putin visited the region Wednesday.
Who will figure out how and when the ceasefire is broken? These are many of the questions that need to be analyzed carefully.
Putin met with Washington's special envoy Thursday, and the Russian president says he is prepared to speak with his U.S.
For fuck's sake, just play the fucking Putin clip. Just let the man fit. Sorry, I just get irritated sometimes trying to cover this shit. Because it's just just tell me. Putin's explaining it. I don't need you to jump in and pause every 30 seconds. Okay, let me see if I can find this. Okay. Let me see if I can find it. I'm sorry. I get really tired of dealing with Western press. Let's see here. Okay, I'm trying to find it. It looks like they don't actually quote Putin on most of this stuff, or they just kind of go out. Okay, I'm sorry, guys. I didn't think it would be that hard to just find the direct quote. But I guess that's part of it. I find that's part of it is they never actually directly quote this stuff. It's like Lavrov will say things all the time. They say things all the time and they don't cover it in the West. Okay, maybe the Kremlin website has it. Task News. Let's go to Russian state media. I have to go to Russian state media because they don't cover it. Let's see here. Okay, here we go. Just trying to find this. Let's see here. Wow. I mean, I'm sorry, guys. If somebody wants to send me it on Discord, I guess this is my fault for assuming that it wouldn't be that hard to find the statements that Putin made at a press conference. Let's see, maybe this
We
is it.
agree with the proposal for a ceasefire, to cease hostilities, but we proceed from the fact that this ceasefire should lead to an enduring peace and should remove the root causes of this crisis. We are in favor of it, but there are nuances. What are they? First of all, what are we going to do about this incursion in Kursk region? If we ceased hostilities for 30 days, what would that mean? Would that mean that everybody there would leave? Should we release them after they...
Well, I mean, that's a good point, from Putin. Okay, Ukraine invaded. Kursk, we beat them, and now they're calling for a ceasefire when they're running away with their tail between their legs. So if there was a ceasefire, would they just all be allowed to leave?
They have committed numerous crimes against civilians there, or will the Ukrainian leadership...
or will they be commanded to surrender? Okay, so they don't have it. Okay, let's just go down. Okay, I'm just going to summarize it because I can't find the actual clip anywhere. So Putin basically just goes through the mechanics of the ceasefire. He's like, how is this ceasefire going to happen? Who's going to monitor it? What enforcement mechanism is there going to be if either side breaks it? What do we get out of this agreement? Like, he just basically went through like how this doesn't really make a lot of sense from a logistical level. And he said, look, we don't trust Ukraine to not just break the ceasefire immediately. We don't get anything out of this. It's just going to be a chance for them to regroup, refortify their positions, draft some more people. We don't get anything out of this from a military standpoint. So that's more or less what happened. And Putin just said a ceasefire has to be part of a long-term... Oh, transcript of speeches and comments on comments where on this video? To be part of a long-term... I don't see comments on the BBC video. Oh, you posted link, but it won't share. Okay, well, thank you for trying, Aiden, but why would you need to be able to share links to news articles on YouTube? Okay, so that was basically Putin's point. Also, we aren't going to do like this thing where we have the ceasefire and then like we don't have a ceasefire and we're just going to go back to this endless stream of negotiations and stuff like that. Either we get a final settlement, either we get something substantive out of this, or we're not going to do anything because we're not going to go back to like the last 10 years or whatever, which is the perspective. Now, with regards to the Kursk operation, Russia basically just completely blew the Ukrainians out. Like, this is where we were at the beginning of the month. They launched just a huge assault, and they've basically been completely kicked out of the Kursk region. Tons of different minor settlements have been captured. Suja, the only major settlement that they were able to capture in the Kursk region, has been grabbed, and it sounds like they are pushing for the border. The Ukrainian army ran away in complete disarray. Once again, I don't blame them for that. They were not allowed to withdraw until the last possible minute. So what happens if you're not allowed to withdraw in good order is, particularly in ancient warfare, most casualties come after one side is lost and they break and they start to run for it, and they're no longer actively defending themselves. So what happens in the case of these battles is the Ukrainian high command won't allow them to withdraw. So they basically just give them standard die orders, and then they allow them to get surrounded. Now, there's different types of encirclement. There's fire encirclement, wherein Russia is able to hit anything within a 360 degrees of the pocket. They don't necessarily have troops stationed there, but it's within firing range of their short-range artillery. So that's one form of it. And they basically will just stay there until they are surrounded. And then generally there isn't even an order to withdraw. Sersky will announce some sort of like relief force or just tell them to hold position, but eventually they'll break and start fleeing for safety. And what winds up happening then is, and there's been a lot of videos coming out about what's happening in Kursk, is they can't move out in large formations or they're just going to get hit with Iskanders or other large missiles. So they go out in groups of like 1 to 4 people, just going over the fields and through the forest, trying to make it for the border. And the Russians just have like thousands of drones in the air and satellites and artillery. And as these dudes are trying to get out of the Kursk pocket, they're just getting picked off one by one. It's just a complete and total slaughter. And they had like if they could have withdrawn like months ago. They could have done an orderly retreat where everybody gets all their heavy equipment. They move it to the rear, and they would draw in good order, being able to defend themselves and not in this desperate state. But that's not what happened. And now they're getting killed or massacred because they're not defending themselves anymore. And the Russians really can just kind of go in and do whatever they want. And as I've said, this is what made me come to hate Zelensky in a way I didn't before, was at Avdiivka, where it was very clear that they had lost and that the place was being encircled. I know the map is outdated. I was just showing how much things have changed in the meantime. And they just got massacred, and then they sent more troops in, and they got massacred too, and barely like anyone was able to get out. So this whole thing has just been a massive debacle. Now, once again, as I've said from the beginning, was the Kursk operation embarrassing for Russia? Yeah, I do think it was embarrassing that Ukraine was able to invade part of Russia and temporarily hold ground in a war that Russia was supposedly winning. That was, I think, embarrassing. The thing was, though, it's not what it seems. The Kursk is a rural area. Suja, I think, has like 5,000 people. Let me just see. I think it's literally like 5,000 people. 6,000 people. That was the largest settlement they captured. So it's just the most rural areas. And people will say, well, I mean, it's humiliating. But let's take a similar scenario, or even a more extreme scenario. Let's say that Canada went to war with the United States, and the Canadian Army sent a force into Montana or North Dakota or something like that in the middle of nowhere. They grabbed a bunch of territory and maybe one small city, and then they said, we successfully invaded the U.S. It's not like they aren't defending that area to nearly the same extent as they're defending a major city or somewhere of importance. Is it embarrassing? Yes, but it's not like, it's not significant, and it's frankly not that hard to do, to just find an unimportant area and temporarily occupy it. I don't know. You can say that's a cope or something like that, but occupying some forests in a small town in Kursk is nothing compared to taking Avdiivka or Bakhmut or Chasiv Yar or any of the main fortress cities where brutal battles have been going on for like years now. So what the Russians wound up doing, to the best of my knowledge, and there's been a lot of different back and forths as to what people actually thought was going on in the Kursk region. So one theory is that the Russians figured out the Ukrainians would do this, and they let them invade. They let them invade to create a trap of sorts. Now, I don't know if this is true or not, but it could be a cope, but it's not impossible. The Russians have done stuff like this in the past. And because of that, they had to occupy this sizable amount of territory within Russia. That's quite a distance further from Sumy, from their supply lines, and wherein they were surrounded by Russian territory, and they were constantly under bombardment from missiles and drones and stuff like that, and they didn't have prepared defenses or bunkers or the kind of stuff they would normally have. And the Ukrainian high command just kept feeding troops into there, and they would pull them off of Donbass or some of the more important lines to keep it going. And some people suggest that's the reason why Russia didn't do it quicker. Didn't go through it quicker than how they did, because there was no real danger on that front anymore of the Ukrainians making a breakthrough, and they were getting really good kill ratios just because they were basically sitting ducks for artillery and stuff like that. So that disaster is happening. Okay, so that brings us to, sorry if I'm jumping around a bit. I'm doing the weave as Trump said it. Okay, so Trump, surrender, Kursk. So Trump, and I will give Trump credit for this. You can say it's cynical or whatever. Trump is like one of the very few Western leaders who has expressed genuine concern for the Ukrainian people, for the death toll, for the human tragedy on both sides. He is one of the few people who has expressed that on a consistent basis. And once again, you can say that it's cynicism or whatever, but at least he's talking about it. So this is what he posted on Truth Social. We had very good and productive. So after the conference at Vienna, wherein Ukraine agreed to the ceasefire that doesn't benefit Russia, Witkoff went to Moscow and talked to Putin, and this is kind of Trump's post-mortem on that. We had very good and productive discussions with President Vladimir Putin of Russia yesterday, and there is a very good chance that this horrible, bloody war can finally come to an end. But at this very moment, thousands of Ukrainian troops are completely surrounded by the Russian military, and in a very bad and vulnerable position. I have strongly requested to President Putin that their lives be spared. This would be a horrible massacre, one not seen since World War II. God bless them all. So if you look at what the pro-Ukrainian people have been saying on Twitter, it's actually kind of disgusting. Basically, they just said that Trump is a Russia shill, that he's paid by the Kremlin, that so the narrative is in this rapid collapse. So let's look again at how rapid this is. Okay, so this was 5 days ago. This is today. So is it really that much of a stretch that some of the Ukrainian soldiers might have gotten trapped because they were trying to escape on foot amidst a hail of drones and artillery and stuff like that? And there's a bunch of them who are just stuck in buildings or basements or the woods or something like that. Well, the pro-Ukrainian side is saying, a lot of them, that this is not, Trump is lying. This is Trump shilling for Putin. His concern about the lives of Ukrainian soldiers is somehow some sort of, I don't even know, but basically they said that Trump was buying into Kremlin propaganda points. And once again, I'm looking at a pro-Ukrainian map. So Putin actually agreed to this. Putin said that he would spare the lives. Okay, so where was it Putin said? I'm just trying to find it. Do they actually have the statement from Putin? No, they don't actually have the statement from... Why would they have the statement from Putin? That's not relevant to it. So, okay, let's see here. I'm just trying to find it. Yeah, Ukraine war. Kiev denies Trump's claim of Ukrainian encirclement. Okay. So, what Putin wound up saying is... I'm just trying to find this. Continue reading. Okay. No, they don't. They don't actually quote what Putin said here. See, I wish I could bring you quotes, but none of these actually reference it in a lot of the cases. I'm just trying to find here. So, okay, here we go. I found it. Okay, so this is what Putin said in response to the Truth Social account. Putin, addressing his Security Council, said he read Trump's appeal while accusing Ukrainian troops of carrying out crimes against civilians that he said amounted to terrorism, something Kiev denies. Now, I have heard from a couple people, I forget what his name is, that guy who always goes on the Duran, the guy from the front lines, I can't remember his name, but he's talked about this, and I've seen a couple people talk about this, that the Ukrainian soldiers committed a bunch of atrocities in Kursk and just brutally massacred a bunch of civilians. Now, I've seen no confirmation of that, and that could very well be propaganda, but that is what I have seen being claimed. So you can take it or leave it. As with any war, people say these things all the time. My guess is probably some of the ultra-nationalist units did go off the reservation and did brutally murder some people, but it's not maybe a systemic or general policy, if that makes sense. Actually, one second. Let me just change this to live chat. Okay, Putin said he understood the call by Trump to take humanitarian considerations into account. In this regard, I would like to emphasize that if Ukrainian troops lay down their arms and surrender, they will be guaranteed life and decent treatment in accordance with international law and the laws of the Russian Federation. To effectively implement the appeal of the U.S. president, a corresponding order from the military political leadership of Ukraine is needed for its military units to lay down their arms and surrender. Then Medvedev said if they refuse to lay down their arms, they will be methodically and mercilessly destroyed. I don't know. That seems pretty fair to me as far as wars go. They're trapped. They don't have a way of getting out. They can't effectively fight back. So, Lapico, yeah, I've heard about that too. That civilians stuffed in basements in Kursk. I'm just saying I don't know enough to give a definitive answer one way or another. That's not me fence sitting or equivocating. I'm not gonna say something that I 100% don't know is true. I can't remember his name. Trapped. Okay, so I think that's fairly reasonable from Putin. So Trump is once again, he's one of the only people who's actually expressing concerns about the human tragedy. He's like, look, there's all these guys, they're trapped, they're gonna die. Please, Putin, spare them. They're no more threat to you. Let them just don't kill them. So Putin's offer is, look, if you surrender, we promise you will be treated under the Geneva Convention. You can believe that or not, but what else is? That's the best deal they're going to get. They're not going to be allowed to just go back to Ukraine on their own. If Zelensky had any humanity, Sersky, he would allow his men who are cut off to surrender. It's a noble thing to die for your country, but there's no utility to it, then just let your men live. And people were yelling about this and how unfair it is and how Trump's a shill. If there's no troops in the pocket, then no one will have to surrender. So if this winds up working, then I got to give Trump credit for actually getting something done, even if it's 1,000 or 2,000 people wind up getting out of it. So this kind of brings me, okay, I know we've been going for a while, but this kind of brings me to kind of the central point that I'm trying to cover with the whole great powers come in from the cold thing, is we're in this interesting scenario where there is a degree of mutual respect between Putin and Trump. I don't know how much they actually like each other, But Putin's attitude towards Trump is very different from his attitude towards Biden. If you hear, he actually expresses like respect for Trump on a certain level. When he disagrees with them, he does it a lot more politely and a lot more diplomatically. He occasionally compliments him. It's not nearly the same degree of visceral hatred that he had for Biden. And he will say that he will give Trump credit for stuff like this. And he'll say, look, I don't necessarily agree, but I give Trump credit for at least talking about the humanitarian issue and for actually wanting to end the war, which is something Biden didn't want and Zelensky didn't want or any of these people didn't want. So Putin will express that. And Trump will also basically reciprocate and say, look, I don't agree with a lot of what Putin's doing, but at the end of the day, he's the ruler of Russia. He's the leader of the country. It doesn't really matter if you think he's evil, if you think he's the worst guy in the world. The truth of the matter is every day this war goes on, more people are dying, Ukraine is getting destroyed, and there's nothing that really can be achieved by this. There's no way that Ukraine can win a military victory, can get all of its land back, and can definitively defeat Russia. So, look, it's either you just give up and try to get the best terms you get, or the Russians are just going to keep going. And I think to a certain extent, Putin respects this. Now, the Russians are not taking the casualties they were taking earlier, but would it be nice if the war would end? I guess it would be in a lot of ways. It would save them a lot of money. If they could get the sanctions lifted, that they could do business in Europe again and with the United States, that would also be nice. And besides that, Putin can't directly say, no, we want the war to keep going so we can conquer more of Ukraine. If this whole thing is in large degree a land grab and to try to restore Russia's natural borders, Trump saying that he wants a peace and trying to end the war puts Putin in a difficult spot with his allies. Because what is China going to do if the U.S. says we want a negotiated settlement and Putin says, no, I want to conquer more of Ukraine? It's going to make him look really bad. It's going to make him look really bad, and he's going to face pressure from China and India and South Africa because they don't want to be tightly allied with a country who's engaging in what will go from being, in their view, a gray war to a black and white war, where it goes from Russia feeling an existential threat to his existence to them just invading to get a land grab. So that, I think, is kind of what Trump's doing. And I think it's kind of an interesting scenario because I think on one hand, it's the best of times for Putin because you have someone who's actually trying to listen to your concerns, who's actually trying to negotiate, but also kind of the worst of times because I think the Ukrainian army is months away from collapse. I think they will collapse by the end of August, personally. And if the war goes on for another 6 months, Putin can maybe take another couple oblasts. They can maybe take Dnipro, Kharkov, maybe even go down to Odessa. They can dramatically increase what they can ask for if it goes on for longer. So peace now would almost be at the worst time because they're going to be in a position to take more relatively soon. So it's very much just kind of a back and forth. So you have a scenario where both sides kind of want peace, but also don't kind of want peace. Where both sides want to reconcile, but they can't really reconcile. And it's just a very kind of interesting situation. And if you've noticed, one of the things that Trump has done is he's just excluded Ukraine and Europe from basically all of his negotiations with Russia. Because I think he gets, A, that these people piss Putin off and he doesn't trust them, and B, that they're just going to sabotage it. Like, he doesn't want to go back to Istanbul, where Boris Johnson comes in at the last minute and torpedoes it. He doesn't want Zelensky and Zaluzhny and Budanov to show up and wreck the negotiations again. I think Trump gets it that these people are not serious and they don't actually want peace. So he's just excluding them, and he's like, look, I'm just going to talk to Putin. And the other kind of issue Putin has is, I think to a certain extent, I think Putin does trust Trump to keep his word, but Putin can't be certain that if Trump loses if Vance loses in 2028 and Kamala gets in or some other person gets in, that they won't just go back on everything and restart the war. And that's kind of part of the problem with this, is even if the U.S. offered favorable terms, which they're heading in that direction. I mean, there's been a lot of movement. There's been an acceptance that Ukraine will lose at least some territory. Now, I think it's just de facto at the moment, and they won't legally recognize it as part of Russia. But they've acknowledged that, and they've acknowledged that Ukraine will never be allowed to join NATO. So that's already a lot closer to what the Russian position was than what the previous one was. But the view on the Russian side is, well, the West is just going to ignore this. They're just going to go in behind our back and rearm Ukraine again, and we'll be back in this situation in a couple years. And we want this resolved. We want this thing that's been simmering since the Orange Revolution or even earlier to just have a final resolution of one type or another. And as always, you can agree or disagree with that. I think people sometimes forget that there's a difference between me explaining someone's position and how they think and how legitimate or not I regard it. My personal view is that this is, if we want to go, because, okay, so there's the one argument from a lot of the people who are pro-Russia that this was purely a defensive war. This was about NATO. This was about the existential existence of Russia. And then there's another one that this is about Russia trying to get back lost territory, put Ukraine back into its sphere, and pull it away from the West, and that this is great power politics. I think it's somewhere in between. I think people forget that in life there's often syncretic reasons for this. So is this war about an imperialist land grab? Is it about restoring Russia's sphere of influence? Is it about preventing the expansion of NATO? Is it about protecting the rights of ethnic Russians and Russian speakers in Ukraine? The answer is yes to all of those. I think all of them probably matter to Putin at a certain level and to the Russian position. I don't think it's as simple as saying any particular one is necessarily the case. So Cyber Ninja is making a good point. He says Putin can just make unreasonable demands so he can pretend to be negotiating while putting Russia in a position to acquire more. That's possibly true, but once again, that's why I mean that we're in this very ambiguous, difficult situation where Russia and the United States both kind of want to come to some sort of understanding, but also don't want to come to some sort of understanding. And everybody else in the conflict is against resolution. So, like, the two people who have the closest position on this is basically like Putin and Trump, I would say. But they can't really reconcile. And so we're just kind of in this weird limbo state. I think another aspect of this, and I should have talked about this earlier, done its own video, I don't think Putin or Trump really have an endgame at this point in time. I don't think, like, Trump knows exactly how he wants to end this war, and I don't think Putin does. Now, my position since the beginning of this war is I don't think Putin's had a fixed objective. I think maybe initially it was whatever he said it was, which was autonomy for Donetsk and Luhansk. denazification and demilitarization and some of the other aspects of it. But I think as the war's gone on, the war objectives keep shifting, and you have people like Medvedev and some of the more hardliners who keep floating, conquering all of Ukraine or adding additional oblasts or things like that. So I don't think Putin has a definitive answer to what he will accept to end it. I think if Ukraine or America accepted his terms tomorrow, he'd probably take it. But in the meantime, I don't know if he has like a final plan for where he wants to be. My interpretation of what Putin is doing is, regardless of what the negotiated settlement is, the better a military position Russia's in, the better the negotiations will be. So I think he has just left the war in the hands of the general staff to run, and he's not intervening very much politically. And he just says, just keep making progress. I don't know what's going on with Trump and the EU and Zelensky and all these guys. I'm just going to just ignore that and just keep winning the war on the ground. So regardless of what happens diplomatically, we will be in a better position, is what I think he's at. And the war objectives might change. They might take Kharkov. They might take Kramatorsk or some of the other oblasts that they're occupying. So I think that was the case. I think that's what Putin's plan is. I don't think Trump really has a plan. He's just, if you've been following it, and this is why I haven't been following this, been covering it that closely, it's all over the place. Like one day he's like, we're going to lift all the sanctions, then we're going to put on more sanctions, then we're going to let Russia do what they want, then we're going to, I guess, do the opposite, and we're going to like directly oppose Russia. And Trump's just all over the place. All of his posts are just kind of at odds with each other. His administration keeps saying stuff. I don't know if this is the weave, if this is the art of the deal, and he's trying to confuse Putin or whatever. But I don't think either side has a definitive position on where they want to be at the end of this. And that's the problem. And why I say it's coming in from the cold is I think both sides do want to resolve it to a certain extent, but they can't. So what I'm increasingly seeing is people screaming that Trump is a Putin shill. I've seen people say that Trump is a Putin bot, that he's directly paid by Russia, that he's the Manchurian candidate because of his take on this. And his take on this is I think very just simple and straightforward. It's, if you notice when Zelensky was like, I want you to condemn Putin and say like he's evil and stuff like that, and Trump's like, how would that help negotiations? How would that in any way help negotiation? Like, what would it accomplish if I started insulting Putin? Would that make it easier to come to a peace agreement or harder to come to a peace agreement? It's like, I don't feel like winning, like trying to win cheap political points by insulting the guy who I need to agree with. And the way a lot of the pro-Ukrainian people are taking that is that means he's a Russian bot. The idea that the U.S. has to negotiate with Russia at all to end this conflict, it means that he's a Russian plant. And I just think it's a very bad faith argument, and I think it's frankly kind of retarded. Like, you can argue that, so the argument was that Trump is being naive and he's falling for Putin's flattery, and this is kind of a scam to get him to agree to a favorable peace for Russia, and they're tricking him into it. I could understand that, and that would make a bit more sense. If you want to argue that Trump is being naive or that he doesn't really understand what he's playing with. But the idea that Trump is like directly paid by Russia or is like, I don't know, someone said I was like a Russian AI a week or two ago. They're like, I'm 99% that you're a paid Russia shill or a Russian bot or something like that, which It'd be interesting because I've been making videos for over 10 years. So the Russians would have had to have like an advanced AI in like 2015 that was making videos from this account. So, but I don't think that that's the case. I think it's just a bizarre argument to make that Trump is controlled by Russia. Once again, if you want to disagree with his approach towards Russia, that's fine. But I don't think just throwing crazy shit out there really helps your case at all. I don't know. Maybe that's just like a really strange statement to make, and that's just bizarre. So they're just screaming at Trump. The other thing I've been seeing a lot of lately, more so than normal, is the idea that because this is 1939, this is the what was it again? What was the treaty? Was it the Munich Agreement? The Munich Agreement. This is the Munich Agreement. If Trump makes a negotiated settlement with Russia, then that means Russia will invade the Baltic states and Poland, is the one that I've seen a lot more recently. And the argument is that Putin is Hitler. Putin is an evil man who is a psychopath and isn't motivated by anything rational. And if he wins in Ukraine, for some reason he's going to invade Poland and the Baltic states. Now, why is he going to invade those? I don't know. It's not really explained. It's because he can and because he's evil. So I brought up the point, well, but the Baltic states are in NATO. People say, well, if Putin attacked Ukraine, then he'll attack Estonia. And I'm like, but Estonia is in NATO. Ukraine isn't. Like, that's a big difference. So the explanation I've seen is that the U.S. and NATO will not come to the defense of the Baltic states. That because there's a large Russian minority in those countries, Putin will invade them and conquer them on behalf of that minority. And because they're small countries, NATO will just not do anything. So Putin will risk a direct war with three nuclear powers, Britain, France, and the United States, to attack countries that don't really matter and are not a military threat to the United States. Really? Why would they go to war with Poland either? Poland actually has probably the strongest army in the EU. Okay, so Poland does not border Russia proper. It borders Kaliningrad, yes, but it does not border like the main part of Russia. I guess if they were to absorb Belarus, it would. But is there even any like ethnic Russians in eastern Poland? I don't really get what Putin would have to gain from it. It kind of relies on the idea that, once again, Putin's just a psychopath who just wants to kill people. I think that's always a bad take to have. Like, once again, and let's just think about this for a minute. So Putin has been in power since 1999. He has, like an 80% approval rate. Russia's, like, crime rate, poverty rate, all the, like, basically every measure of stuff, by every measure conceivable, Russia's in a much better place. Putin has consolidated power. He's the absolute master of Russia. And so we're supposed to believe that the guy who did that is like a schizophrenic psychopath who isn't able to think in rational terms. Like, that just doesn't seem correct to me. If you want to think Putin's an evil genius, that's fine. That's an acceptable answer. But the idea that he's insane, I just don't think that's a good place to start from. Maybe, once again, maybe I'm just naive or stupid or whatever. but I just don't see Russia invading the Baltic states. I don't, other than if they pass legislation to like expel the Russian population or severely repress them, maybe. But there's very specific reasons why they went into Ukraine. I think mostly just because Ukraine is a large country, and we've seen how powerful their army has gotten, and they're able to hold off Russia for like 3 years, albeit with all of the strength of the collective West. So doesn't that kind of mean his concerns were legitimate with regards to that? I don't know. I could be wrong. Putin could be trying to restore the Russian Empire, and he will go in. But here's the other thing. So Based Caulfield says normies literally believe North Korea can invade America. Yeah, did any of you guys play the game Homefront the Revolution, where North Korea somehow invaded the United States and occupied it? How is that even possible? Like, if we look at the population of Russia, it's 140 million people? Yeah, 140 million people. What's the population of the EU? Population of EU. The population of the EU is like 3 times that of Russia. And then there's also the United States and Canada and the other countries in NATO. So the population of NATO collectively is what, like 6 times Russia's? So Russia with 1 million soldiers is somehow going to occupy all of Ukraine, all of Poland, all of Estonia, all of the Balkans. They're going to go past Germany and France and Spain and Britain, and they're somehow going to overrun all of this stuff. Which I just don't, like, I don't see how that's possible. Just logistics of it seem like, I don't see them having the number of soldiers to do it, even if they wanted to. Even if they brought in like full-on conscription, and they conscripted like 10 million people, I don't think that's enough to overrun and conquer Europe. It doesn't even really matter if the Europeans even had any weapons. Even if they faced no military opposition, occupying an area this big with this many people, I just think is impossible. And I saw these people saying stuff like, Britain is going to be invaded by Russia. Like, how? Russia doesn't have that much of a surface navy. It has a good, like, underwater navy, but how the fuck is Russia going to get tens or hundreds of thousands of soldiers from what? Like, from Murmansk to Scotland without anybody trying to stop? Like, the logistics of it just don't make any sense. And this is just, I'm seeing this more and more, and people just screaming that, like, we can't negotiate with Putin, he's evil and stuff like that. And Trump's just like, and this is, I think, the reasonable position. Okay, guys. We can either try to save part of Ukraine and get the killing to stop and try to get some sort of deal that's better than total capitulation, or we can keep going. And that is just a basic acknowledgement of reality. And the fact that means that he's a Russia shill and that he's like an AI bot or whatever, I think is retarded. I think it's retarded and stupid. And if people want to take the position that this was completely wrong, that Putin's an evil man, that Ukraine has the right to join NATO, that it has the right to join the EU, that it has the right to pass its anti-Russian citizen laws, that it has the right to ban the Orthodox Church, all these other things, then that's fine. But that's the world that you want to live in. This is the world we actually live in. The world we actually live in is great powers often do what they want, and the lesser countries just kind of have to take it. And like Ukraine shouldn't act like Phil from The Sopranos. Like they have to do what Phil did when he was in prison, when he was in the can for 20 years. They have to compromise. What Phil Leotardo did. but they can't do what he did when he got out, and then there was no compromise, and then it led to a mob war with New Jersey that devastated both sides. And that's kind of where they're at the moment. So I guess what I'm saying is Zelensky is Phil Leotardo. Is I guess what I'm saying. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at, but also just the level of like, and I got a fair amount of pushback on the video I did on it's a LARP that Europe can rearm, and people I don't think understood what I was saying. I hold the same position of Viktor Orban. Like, keep in mind, when they did the European resolution to increase military spending, Hungary voted for that. Hungary didn't have an issue with expanding the military budget or trying to build up NATO. They were okay with that. Their opposition was to giving more money to Ukraine and sending EU troops, to send NATO troops there. They just don't want to go to war with Russia. So I was not disagreeing with the EU's decision to try to rebuild its industry, to try to rebuild their armies. I think that's a good idea. The point is, I don't think they can do it like within the next decade. It's not going to be in time to make any kind of actual difference in this war. Maybe in like 20 years they'll be able to have a military capable of fighting Russia, but that's not going to happen. This thing is going to be resolved long before then. Also, I was just pointing out, like, it's this idea. Somebody said, well, they can't announce what their plans for militarily rearming, because if they do, then that's them giving away vital strategic information. So, but is it? Is it really? Like, you can't hide a mass-scale industrial program. My point is that, like, they're in Europe, Germany's got rid of its debt brake. They're going to run up massive debt to try to squeeze water out of a stone. I don't think there's a long-term plan. They're just trying to grift as much money as possible. I don't think there isn't a long-term reindustrialization plan. They would have to change their energy policies. Ironically enough, something that they would have to do in order to get this situation to work would be to lift the sanctions on Russia so they have cheap oil imports again. So, yeah. And that's what I mean. Like, I'm all for the EU rearming. I think that's a good idea. Just it's going to take a while. I think the funniest thing about this, that's way too long, if they actually follow through and get rid of environmental regulations that strangle industry, it's a matter of less than 10 years. Maybe? I don't know, man, because energy costs are really, really high. And I don't know if the EU will let them get rid of some of the restrictions. Like, Germany's reached the point where it's cheaper to burn oil for heat than it is to burn natural gas, which is something I've never even heard of something like that before. Okay, but even if it's 5 years, it doesn't matter. This war is going to be over before then. The EU will not. There's a boatloads of shale gas in Europe, but we're not allowed to exploit them. Okay, I will take your word for that, Debil. I haven't heard about that. That could very well be the case. I don't know either way. But that could very well be the case that there's shale gas. I'll just take your word for it. They can't do nuclear power plants either because they get shut down and they're evil and stuff like that. I just don't think. Once again, it doesn't. The point I'm trying to make is it will not be done in a timely manner that will enable them to actually help the Ukrainian problem. But I'll look at that at some point, Devil, because I hadn't heard that, but that's an interesting point to make. However, that's still not oil, and they need oil for a lot of these things. Unless we want to go back down the coal liquefaction round. You know, it's funny how what we're talking about now is that we need to rearm Germany to fight Russia. That's the goal. Germany needs to rearm, to remilitarize itself, to switch to a war economy in order to fight Russia. You know, where have we heard this movie before? Like, if we're talking about everything being 1939, then is it really a good idea? Like, by that narrative, why do we want Germany to become a major military power again? Remember what happened in 1939 when that went down? But no, that's we're gonna have the Fourth Reich. It's just ridiculous. It's just so dumb. Honestly, if you want my opinion, I think what they need to do is the U.S. gives Ukraine an ultimatum to accept Russia's terms. Ukraine rejects it. America gives up and leaves them to their fate. The Europeans can try to hold it on, but eventually they just accept. They just let Ukraine collapse and hopefully keep some part of it independent. And then Europe switches back to trying to deal with their internal problems for the next decade and reindustrialize, rearm, and try to get ready as best they can if there's going to be a future conflict with Russia. And I don't really see anything else that they can do that makes any kind of sense at this point in time. So, yeah. That is what I think. So hopefully that was coherent enough. As I said, it's kind of like Trump. It's the weave. It all kind of comes together at the end. Let's see here. I'm more worried about them moving around all those weapons to the criminal circuit because human trafficking, Ukraine is famous for weapon trafficking as well. Yeah, haven't the cartels gotten a lot of the weapons that they've shipped to Ukraine? Like, that's a very good point, Miot, if that's how you pronounce that. That's an extremely good point. The longer this goes on, the more weapons they're giving to one of the most corrupt countries on earth, who's selling them on the black market to all kinds of shady people. Like, they're selling them to cartels and like terrorists in the Middle East, and God knows who's getting those weapons. They're just disappearing in the black hole of the international arms market, and that's always a bad thing. Like, do we really want, like, FARC or I don't know, the insurgents in India to be getting, like, modern U.S. weapons? I just don't think so. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. Everybody have a great day, and I'll